Imagine waking up and feeling as though your body has undergone a subtle, silent transformation overnight. It is not something you can pinpoint on a specific calendar date, nor is it as obvious as a new gray hair or a faint wrinkle at the corner of your eye. This is what we call the unseen shift. It usually begins sometime during your fourth decade of life, and it marks a profound biological transition rather than a simple, linear descent into the process of aging. For many, this shift is first noticed as a lingering stiffness in the joints or a strange, heavy sensation in the limbs that makes routine movements feel like a chore. As a clinical pharmacist reviewer, I spend my professional life looking past these surface symptoms to the complex molecular machinery that drives our physical existence. My role is to analyze the deep data of metabolic health, connecting the dots between clinical research and the lived experience of patients who feel like their bodies are slowly betraying them. From my perspective, what you are experiencing after the age of 40 is not just an inevitable part of life, but a series of measurable biochemical events that can be understood and addressed today. The alarm bells of this transition often ring at the most inconvenient times. Think about that sharp, agonizing contraction that jolts you awake at 3 in the morning. Your calf muscle tightens into a hard, unforgiving knot, and for several breathless seconds, the world disappears into a haze of intense, localized pain. While well-meaning friends might tell you to just drink more water or perhaps eat a banana for the potassium, the clinical reality is far more profound. That midnight cramp is a desperate scream from your cellular environment. It is the visible manifestation of a critical depletion of intracellular magnesium, a mineral that serves as the essential engine for thousands of enzymatic reactions within the human body. When the levels of magnesium drop within the muscle fiber, the delicate balance of electricity and chemistry that governs every single movement begins to shatter. This is the exact moment where the unseen shift becomes a visible, painful struggle for physical stability. The stakes of this deficiency are significantly higher than a few lost hours of sleep or a momentary discomfort. We are talking about the systematic breakdown of your skeletal muscle integrity, a process professionally known as sarcopenia. For many years, the traditional medical community viewed the loss of muscle mass after the age of 40 as a natural decline, a slow fading away of strength that we must all eventually accept as our fate. However, my review of the latest scientific data suggests a completely different narrative. The wasting of muscle tissue, the loss of explosive power, and the increasing fragility of the musculoskeletal system are frequently the consequence of a disrupted chemical environment. When the body lacks the specific mineral tools it needs to repair, maintain, and activate muscle tissue, it has no choice but to let those fibers wither. This loss of muscle does not just change how you look in the mirror, it changes how you interact with the world, leading to a loss of independence and a decreased quality of life. There is currently a significant information gap between what is being discovered in high-level medical journals and what the average person hears during a standard checkup. You have an absolute right to understand the complex biochemical mechanisms that govern your own health, the same intricate details that are typically reserved for peer-reviewed academic papers. It is my mission to bridge that gap and show you exactly why your muscles are changing at the microscopic level. The core truth is that the accelerated loss of muscle after 40 is not an inevitability, but often a direct result of disrupted magnesium-dependent enzymatic reactions. Without this master mineral, the very molecules of energy, known as adenosine triphosphate, become biologically inert and useless. Your body is a masterpiece of precision engineering, but even the finest machine will fail if it lacks a fundamental component like magnesium. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We are about to explore how this single mineral deficiency orchestrates a cascade of failure that impacts everything from your energy levels to your genetic signals for muscle growth. Understanding this is the first step toward reclaiming your physical autonomy and replacing wellness promises with hard clinical data. To understand why this mineral is so central to our survival, we must look back at our evolutionary history. For thousands of generations, the human body developed within a landscape where magnesium was abundant. Our ancestors consumed wild plants grown in rich soil and drank water from deep springs saturated with minerals. This meant our biological systems never needed to develop a robust mechanism for storing magnesium. It was always there in constant supply. Today, we live in a world of agricultural exhaustion. Intensive farming has systematically stripped the soil of its mineral wealth. Even those who eat a healthy diet are often receiving only a fraction of the magnesium that was available just a century ago. For the individual who has crossed the threshold of 40, this environmental depletion becomes a critical biological bottleneck that prevents the cellular systems from functioning with the fluid, effortless efficiency of youth. This deficiency strikes at the muscle function through the sodium-potassium pump, or the sodium-potassium adenosine triphosphatase enzyme. Every muscle cell relies on this pump to maintain its life force. It is a microscopic battery charger that maintains the electrical charge of the cell membrane by moving sodium out and pulling potassium in. This entire process is absolutely dependent on magnesium. Magnesium is the chemical key that unlocks the pump and allows the energy to flow. Without it, the pump becomes paralyzed. When your pumps fail due to a lack of magnesium, your muscle cells lose their ability to hold an electrical charge. They become leaky and inefficient. This is a fundamental breakdown of your cellular infrastructure. The muscle fibers become overstimulated and incapable of fully resetting, leading to a state of chronic cellular fatigue that no amount of rest or simple hydration can fix without replenishing the underlying mineral debt. Beyond electrical regulation, magnesium acts as the master stabilizer for our genetic architecture. It maintains the structural integrity of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, and ribonucleic acid, known as RNA. In your muscles, this role is vital for protein synthesis. Every time you move, you create microscopic tears in your muscle fibers. Under normal conditions, your cells use RNA to translate genetic instructions into new proteins that repair those fibers. However, if magnesium levels are low, the scaffolding of this repair process becomes unstable. The instructions for muscle maintenance become slow or garbled. This creates a state where your body breaks down muscle tissue, but lacks the machinery to rebuild it. Over time, this leads to the progressive thinning of muscle mass known as sarcopenia. Your cellular battery is losing its ability to hold a charge, and the blueprint for your physical strength is fading away in the dark. We must also challenge the assumption of what constitutes an adequate intake of this mineral. There is a profound difference between the amount of magnesium required to prevent an emergency and the amount required for optimal function after 40. Many people are told their levels are normal based on a standard blood test. However, this is a misleading metric. Only 1% of your magnesium is found in the blood. The rest is in your bones and muscles. Because the heart requires precise magnesium levels to beat, the body will strip minerals from your skeletal muscles to keep blood levels stable. You can be in a state of severe muscle starvation while your blood tests appear normal. After the 4th decade, your demand for this mineral increases as cellular repair becomes less efficient. What was adequate in your 20s is now a deficiency that actively drives the aging process and weakens your structural frame. This internal struggle manifests as a physical sensation many describe as leaden limbs. It is a heavy, dragging weight that inhabits your arms and legs during basic activities. When you walk, it feels as though invisible sandbags are strapped to your ankles. When you reach for something, your shoulders feel stiff and unyielding. This is the direct result of the sodium-potassium pump failing to maintain the electrical gradient of your muscle cells. Your muscles are struggling to fire because they are stuck in a state of partial depolarization. They are heavy because they are metabolically exhausted, forced to work twice as hard for half the result. This leaden sensation is the physical voice of your cells, signaling that the master cofactor is missing, and the foundations of your physical autonomy are beginning to crumble under a silent famine that is slowly draining your power. The leaden feeling we discussed earlier is merely the outward symptom of a much deeper chemical crisis occurring within the power plants of your cells. To understand why your endurance seems to vanish after 40, we must look at the primary currency of biological energy, known as adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. In every biology textbook, ATP is described as the fuel of the cell. However, this is a dangerous oversimplification that hides the truth about your metabolic decline. Pure adenosine triphosphate is biologically inert and essentially useless to your muscle fibers, unless it is bound to a magnesium ion. This pairing creates what we call the magnesium ATP complex. Without the stabilizing presence of a magnesium ion, the four negative charges on the phosphate tail of the ATP molecule repel each other with such force that the molecule becomes volatile and impossible for your enzymes to handle. Magnesium acts as a chemical clamp, holding the molecule in the perfect geometric orientation, so it can be broken down to release the energy your muscles need to move. When you are deficient, you are not necessarily lacking the fuel itself. You are lacking the tool required to use it. This dependency extends into the very heart of the mitochondria, where the synthesis of energy occurs. Think of the adenosine triphosphate synthase as a microscopic rotary motor, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. This motor is responsible for attaching phosphate groups to create new energy molecules. Magnesium is the essential structural component that stabilizes the polyphosphate chain during this high-speed rotation. When magnesium levels drop in the fourth decade of life, this motor begins to stutter and misfire. The production of cellular energy becomes inefficient, leading to a state of chronic metabolic friction. You start to experience the energy plateau, that frustrating wall where your body simply refuses to give you more, no matter how hard you push your will. This is not a failure of character or a lack of motivation. It is a predictable mechanical failure of the mitochondrial motor, because the master cofactor is missing from the assembly line. Your cells are essentially trying to run a high-performance engine while the internal components are rattling loose. Furthermore, we must consider the role of magnesium in the creatine kinase reaction. This is the pathway that allows for the lightning-fast regeneration of energy during short, intense bursts of activity. Whether you are lifting a heavy grocery bag or pushing off the ground to stand up, your body relies on the transfer of phosphate groups through this magnesium-dependent enzyme. Without enough magnesium, the bridge between your energy stores and your muscle fibers is essentially washed away. This is why the explosive power of youth seems to fade so rapidly after 40. Your fast-twitch muscle fibers, also known as type 2 fibers, are the most sensitive to this disruption. These are the fibers that give your body its shape, its firmness, and its ability to react quickly. When the creatine kinase synergy is broken, these fibers are the first to atrophy, leading to the visible thinning of the muscles in the legs and the loss of that upright, powerful posture we often associate with vitality. Imagine your body as a high-performance vehicle that has been forced to run on low-grade fuel for years. The engine might still turn over, and you might still be able to drive to work. But the moment you try to accelerate or climb a steep hill, the system begins to knock and shudder. This is exactly what is happening to your skeletal muscle after the age of 40. The energy plateau is the point where your cellular demand for magnesium-bound adenosine triphosphate exceeds your body's ability to provide it. At this stage, your metabolism shifts from a state of abundance to a state of survival. Your nervous system begins to throttle your physical output to prevent a total systemic collapse. This is why routine tasks that were once effortless now require a conscious effort of will. The stamina you took for granted in your 20s was powered by a fluid and efficient cycle that has now become a clunky and disjointed process. The downstream effects of this energy crisis are even more devastating at the structural level. When the magnesium ATP complex is unstable, the mitochondria become prone to leaking reactive oxygen species. These are volatile molecules that cause internal rust, a process known as oxidative stress. In a body starved for magnesium, this oxidative stress specifically damages the delicate membranes of the mitochondria themselves. This creates a vicious cycle of mitochondrial decay. The more damaged the mitochondria become, the less energy they produce, and the more waste they generate. This chronic oxidative stress acts like a slow-burning fire that consumes your muscle integrity from the inside out. It is this specific biochemical breakdown that accelerates the transition into sarcopenia. You are not just getting older, your cellular engines are breaking down because they lack the stabilizing properties of magnesium. These type 2 fast-twitch fibers are not just for athletes. They are the structural pillars of your metabolic health. When magnesium deficiency triggers mitochondrial decay, these fibers lose their ability to contract with force. They begin to shrink, and as they do, your overall metabolic rate drops. You are losing your most metabolically active tissue because the energy production at the cellular level has reached a state of gridlock. The loss of these fibers is not a quiet process. It is heralded by that deep, pervasive sense of fatigue that seems to settle into the very marrow of your bones. It is the sound of your biological engines slowing down, a direct consequence of an energy currency that has lost its biological value. This cellular exhaustion sets the stage for a much more painful disruption in how your muscles actually move and relax. While the energy crisis we discussed previously explains why your muscles feel heavy, we must now address why they often feel brittle, tense, and resistant to your commands. This brings us to the second pillar of the magnesium deficiency crisis, the catastrophic disruption of calcium signaling. In the world of cellular physiology, calcium and magnesium are the two halves of a vital biological coin. They operate in a state of constant, elegant antagonism. If calcium is the accelerator that drives muscle contraction, magnesium is the essential brake that permits relaxation. Without the brake, the engine of your musculoskeletal system becomes trapped in a state of high-revving dysfunction. Every single movement you make, from blinking an eye to climbing a long staircase, is governed by this delicate push and pull between these two minerals. To visualize this, we must look inside the myocyte, specifically at a structure called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Think of this as a specialized, microscopic warehouse designed for the sole purpose of storing calcium ions. When your brain sends a signal to move, the warehouse doors swing open and calcium floods the muscle fiber. This flood is the mechanical trigger that allows your muscle proteins to bind and shorten. However, the true metabolic cost occurs when the movement is over. To allow the muscle to relax, the body must forcefully pump all that calcium back into the warehouse against an incredible concentration gradient. This is not a passive process. It requires a massive expenditure of energy and the activation of a specialized protein pump known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium adenosine triphosphate ACE. This pump has an absolute, non-negotiable requirement for magnesium to function. If you are among the vast population over 40 with insufficient intracellular magnesium, these pumps begin to fail. They cannot move the calcium back into storage fast enough, or worse, they cannot hold it there at all. This failure is the direct physiological cause of the dreaded 3 a.m. leg cramp. While you are sleeping, and your body should be in a state of total recovery, the gates of the sarcoplasmic reticulum begin to leak. Because there is not enough magnesium to act as a chemical stabilizer and close those gates, calcium ions begin to seep back into the muscle fiber in a slow, steady trickle. This spontaneous leak triggers a sudden, violent contraction that you cannot control. It is a molecular cramp, a physical manifestation of a cellular gate that no longer has the resources to stay shut. This is not merely a sign of dehydration or a lack of stretching. It is a sign that your mineral balance is so compromised that your cells can no longer maintain the boundary between activity and rest. This phenomenon is not limited to acute spasms. For most individuals in their middle years, this calcium flood manifests as a state of chronic low-grade stiffness. You might notice it as a persistent tension in your shoulders that no amount of massage seems to release, or a tightness in your lower back that makes getting out of a chair feel like a choreographed struggle. This is because your muscle fibers are never truly at rest. They are stuck in a state of semi-permanent microcontraction. Even when you are sitting still, your muscles are using up precious energy just to stay partially contracted because the relaxation mechanism is gridlocked. This constant state of tension creates a clinical sensation of being physically bound or restricted within your own skin. It is as if the fluidity of your movements has been replaced by a stiff, mechanical resistance that ignores your desire for comfort. The implications of this enzymatic gridlock extend far beyond mere discomfort. When your muscles cannot fully relax, they lose their elasticity and their ability to absorb impact. This significantly increases your risk of tendinitis, muscle tears, and joint strain. A muscle that is already partially contracted has a much shorter range of motion and a lower threshold for injury. Furthermore, we must recognize that this same mineral antagonism governs the rhythm of your heart. The cardiac muscle relies on this same calcium-magnesium exchange to beat. When the relaxation phase of the heartbeat is slowed due to magnesium deficiency, the entire cardiovascular system is placed under increased stress. This is the hidden cost of the 40-plus transition. You are fighting a battle on two fronts. Your energy production is failing, and your relaxation mechanisms are jammed. The result is a body that feels increasingly fragile, rigid, and disconnected from the effortless grace you once possessed. Your musculoskeletal system is crying out for the mineral break that would finally allow the gears to turn without friction, yet without intervention, the stiffness only deepens. As we delve deeper into the biological architecture of the aging body, we encounter a regulatory system far more complex than simple wear and tear. This brings us to a critical junction in our understanding of why muscle mass seems to vanish despite our best efforts. We must discuss a protein called myostatin. In the world of molecular biology, myostatin acts as the ultimate genetic brake. Its primary job is to ensure that your muscles do not grow uncontrollably, maintaining a structural equilibrium. However, in a body over 40 that is starved of magnesium, this delicate regulatory system enters a state of catastrophic dysregulation. Magnesium is not merely a passenger in this process. It is a primary modulator of the genetic signals that govern muscle synthesis. When intracellular magnesium levels drop below a critical threshold, the body perceives a state of cellular stress. In response, it begins to overexpress myostatin. It is as if the biological brake is being pressed firmly to the floor, even when you are trying to move forward. This shift creates a cascade of events that effectively tells your skeletal muscles to stop the process of repair and regeneration. You may find yourself stuck in a frustrating cycle where you are working out harder, lifting more weight, or increasing your protein intake, yet your physical results remain stagnant or even decline. This phenomenon is clinically recognized as anabolic resistance. In a healthy, magnesium-rich environment, the physical stress of exercise acts as a signal for the muscle to rebuild itself stronger and larger. But when the biochemical environment becomes magnesium depleted, that signal is intercepted. The elevated myostatin levels override the growth stimulus, creating an environment that is fundamentally anti-growth. You are essentially fighting against your own genetic programming. The muscle fibers that are damaged during exercise are not replaced with the same efficiency, leading to a slow, steady erosion of your physical foundation. This is why the traditional advice of just moving more often fails for many individuals in their middle years. Without addressing the underlying mineral deficiency, the body lacks the chemical permission to grow and recover. Furthermore, magnesium plays a non-negotiable role in supporting insulin-like growth factor 1, often referred to as IGF-1. This hormone is the primary driver of muscle maintenance and growth in the adult body. For IGF-1 to do its job, it must bind to specific receptors on the surface of your muscle cells. This binding process is a magnesium-dependent event. If the mineral is absent, the receptor site becomes sluggish and unresponsive. It is like having the right key but a rusted lock that refuses to turn. Even if your levels of IGF-1 are theoretically adequate, your muscles cannot hear the signal it is trying to send. This failure of signaling further compounds the muscle loss, leaving you in a state where your body is effectively ignoring its own anabolic hormones. The visible manifestation of this internal breakdown is often described as a wasting sensation. You may notice that the quadriceps and the glutes, the largest and most powerful muscle groups in your body, begin to lose their tone and definition. These muscles are often the first to show the signs of myostatin dysregulation, because they require the most energy and the most robust repair signals to maintain their mass. You might see a flattening of the glutes or a softening of the thighs. This is not a failure of will or a lack of discipline. It is the outward evidence of a genetic brake that has been left on for too long. This loss of muscle tone is particularly dangerous because it directly impacts your stability and your metabolic health. As foundational muscles shrink, your balance becomes compromised and your insulin sensitivity begins to drop. The loss of tissue makes blood sugar harder to manage. The depletion of magnesium is the silent architect behind this transition, pulling the levers of myostatin and IGF-1 to dictate the fate of your physical form. Your musculoskeletal framework is being held hostage by these signals. You are not just losing muscle, you are losing the metabolic currency that keeps you youthful and resilient. You are being trapped in a body that refuses to heal. The biochemical environment has turned against you, and until that mineral balance is restored, the genetic breaks will continue to prevent the repair your body desperately needs to function. Beyond the genetic breaks of myostatin that we just explored, there is an even more aggressive and destructive force at work within the aging musculoskeletal system. This is the inflammatory fire that smolders within the tissues of a magnesium-starved body. To understand this, we must look at a molecular master switch known as NF-κB. In the world of clinical biochemistry, NF-κB is the primary commander of the inflammatory response. In a state of youthful health, magnesium acts as a natural calmative and a biological stabilizer for this pathway. It keeps the inflammatory response under strict and precise control, ensuring that the fire of inflammation only burns when there is an acute injury to repair. But as you cross the threshold of 40, and your intracellular mineral reserves continue to dwindle, this switch is effectively flipped to the permanent on position. Without sufficient magnesium to act as a regulatory anchor, the NF-κB pathway becomes hyperresponsive, leading to a state of chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation that acts like a slow-moving acid on your muscle fibers. This is not the acute, temporary inflammation that follows a tough workout and leads to growth. Instead, this is what we call a cold fire. When magnesium levels are low, the body begins an overproduction of pro-inflammatory messengers known as cytokines. Specifically, we see a significant rise in C-reactive protein, or CRP, and interleukin-6. In a clinical setting, we view these markers as the precursors to tissue degradation. These cytokines act as the messengers of destruction, traveling through the bloodstream and infiltrating the muscle tissue. Once there, they initiate a process where the body begins to actively dismantle its own muscle proteins. It is a biological paradox where the immune system, designed to protect you, starts to treat your own skeletal muscle as a threat or as redundant material to be broken down. This creates a state of accelerated sarcopenia, where the melting of muscle fibers happens at a pace that far exceeds the normal rate of aging. For the person over 40, this internal chemical war manifests in a very specific and exhausting way. We must distinguish between what I call the ache and the pain. You are likely familiar with the standard soreness that follows physical activity, which usually fades after a day or two as the muscles repair. However, in a magnesium-deficient state, you experience a systemic deep ache that seems to reside in the very marrow of your bones. It is a gnawing, persistent sensation that does not resolve with rest or sleep. You wake up feeling as though you have run a marathon, even when you have been sedentary. This is the inflammatory fire at work. Your muscles are in a constant state of chemical distress, unable to extinguish the inflammatory signals that are preventing recovery. This deep ache is the sound of a system that is being slowly consumed by its own overactive defense mechanisms, leaving you feeling fragile and perpetually exhausted. This state of chronic inflammation further feeds into a devastating feedback loop involving oxidative stress. When your body lacks magnesium, the mitochondria produce an excess of free radicals. These are unstable molecules that cause direct damage to the cellular membranes. This oxidative stress doesn't just damage the muscle fibers themselves. It specifically targets the very enzymes and transport proteins that the body needs to move magnesium into the cells. This is the ultimate tragedy of the magnesium-starved system. The deficiency creates a level of inflammation and stress that damages the cellular machinery required to fix the deficiency. The gates that should allow magnesium to enter the myocytes become warped and non-functional under the pressure of this chemical fire. You are trapped in a cycle where the more magnesium you lose, the harder it becomes for your body to ever reclaim it. This loop leads to a rapid decline in physical resilience. Your muscles lose their ability to bounce back from the minor stresses of daily life. A simple walk or a few hours of yard work can leave you sidelined for days, not because you have injured a tendon, but because your biochemical environment is too inflamed to facilitate the repair. The structural integrity of your skeletal muscle is being eroded from the inside out. You feel as though your physical foundation is softening, your strength is slipping away, and your body is becoming a source of constant, low-level suffering rather than a vessel for movement and life. This is the reality of the inflammatory fire, a silent thief that accelerates the aging process by turning your own biology against your strength. As this fire continues to burn, It sets the stage for the final collapse of physical autonomy, which we must address to understand the full scope of this mineral crisis. We have journeyed through the microscopic architecture of your muscle fibers, witnessing the silent and cascading failures that often define the landscape of the body after you pass the age of 40. As a clinical pharmacist reviewer, my final synthesis of the biochemical data leads to a conclusion that is both sobering and hopeful. Much of what you have been conditioned to accept as the inevitable decay of aging is, in reality, a collection of manageable symptoms stemming from a deep and chronic mineral deficiency. The morning stiffness, the sudden loss of strength, and the persistent heavy feeling in your limbs are not markers of time passing. They are the clear and urgent signals of a magnesium-starved system that is struggling to maintain its most basic functions. This earned insight requires us to look past the superficial trends of the fitness industry and focus on the facts of your internal chemistry. We must acknowledge that the information gap between clinical research and daily life has left many people over 40 feeling helpless. But you now understand the reality of the crisis. You know that without the magnesium adenosine triphosphate complex, your cellular engines cannot produce the power required for movement. You know that when the calcium gates in your sarcoplasmic reticulum fail to close, your muscles remain trapped in a state of microscopic tension that leads to chronic pain and injury. The intellectual pivot I am asking you to make today is to stop seeing your body as a machine that is failing you. Instead, I want you to see it as a communication system that is expressing its unmet biochemical needs. The cramp that jolts you awake at 3 in the morning is not a random glitch. It is a desperate message from your cells, informing you that the electrical gradient of the sodium-potassium pump has collapsed. The softening of your muscle tone and the rise of systemic inflammation are not signs of personal failure. They are the physiological responses to a genetic break that has been left on because the regulatory power of magnesium is missing. My final pharmacist review note is intended to remind you that your biological pathways respond to precision, not to vague promises of wellness. To reclaim your physical autonomy, you must prioritize mineral density and metabolic health with the same rigor you would apply to a medical intervention. You are not just taking a supplement, you are restoring the synergy between your genes and your environment. You are providing the necessary cofactor for over 300 enzymatic reactions that dictate whether your muscle tissue will thrive or wither. This is the difference between surviving the aging process and mastering it through scientific clarity. As you address these deficiencies, you will begin to experience a sense of cellular renewal. The leaden feeling that has defined your routine movements will begin to dissipate, replaced by a lightness and a fluid grace. The deep, gnawing ache of the NF-κB inflammatory fire will finally be extinguished, allowing your muscles to enter a true state of recovery and repair. You will find that your strength is no longer slipping away like sand through your fingers, but is instead becoming a solid foundation upon which you can build your future. This journey has been about reclaiming authority over your own physical existence. By understanding the intricate dance of magnesium, calcium, and adenosine triphosphate, you have moved from a place of confusion to a place of empowered stability. You are no longer a victim of a silent deficiency, but a steward of your own biological resilience. The transition into your 50s, 60s, and beyond does not have to be a story of loss. It can be a story of maintenance, strength, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what your body needs to remain a vessel for life and movement. Close your eyes and imagine the feeling of waking up without the burden of stiffness. Imagine the clarity of a mind and a body that are perfectly synchronized, powered by mitochondria that are firing at their full potential. This is not a dream of youth, but the reality of a body that has been given the tools it needs to function. You have the knowledge and the power to turn the tide of Sarcopenia. This is your moment of reclamation, where you stand tall, move with purpose, and live with the strength that you have rightfully earned.